The golden light of dawn stretched across the savanna like a painter's brush, spilling soft hues of amber over the rolling grasslands. The air was cool and still, carrying only the faint hum of insects and the distant chatter of birds greeting the new day. Herds of antelope moved quietly across the open plains, their silhouettes outlined against the rising sun, while zebras flicked their tails, shaking off the night's rest. Above them, flocks of starlings lifted into the glowing sky, their wings flashing silver in the light. The land seemed to breathe in harmony, every creature falling into its rhythm, every sound a note in nature's morning song. In this golden calm, a lioness stirred from her resting place beneath an acacia tree. Her body, powerful yet graceful, rose slowly, and her amber eyes swept across the tall grasses that swayed like waves in the wind. At her side, a small figure tumbled and rolled, her cub, not yet steady on his paws but already bold in spirit. He batted at blades of grass, pounced on shadows, and leaped clumsily at beetles crawling across the earth. His mother's gaze followed every step, soft but sharp, a shield of silent vigilance. The cub was a spark of life, wide-eyed, curious, unscarred by the harsh lessons the savanna often taught too soon. He stumbled forward, ears perked to the rustle of unseen things, tail flicking with excitement. Each movement pulled him further from the warmth of his mother's side, tugging him toward the edges of the open plain. There, where the grass grew thicker and shadows deepened, the world shifted into something different, something the cub did not yet understand. The jungle edge loomed like a border between innocence and danger. The air grew heavier beneath its canopy, cooler, damp with the scent of earth and old leaves. Vines twisted like veins through the trees, and birdsong gave way to silence, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig. It was here, hidden in the undergrowth, that something unnatural waited. Among the roots and fallen branches sat an object that did not belong to the wilderness. A cage, old and rusted, its bars warped with age. Left behind by hands that sought only to trap and profit, it blended into the earth, forgotten by men but not by time. The cub's paws brushed against the forest floor, his nose twitching at new smells, damp bark, rotting fruit, and the faint metallic tang of iron. He crept closer, his eyes shining with playfulness, not fear. The cage was strange, but to him it was no more than another curiosity. His paw stretched out, small and soft against the corroded frame, pressing against the half-open door. The sound shattered the morning. With a hollow clang, the door snapped shut. The slam echoed through the trees like a gunshot, cutting through the savanna's peace. Birds burst from the branches in frantic flight, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The cub froze for only a heartbeat before panic struck him. He let out a cry, high and sharp, the sound of confusion and fear laced with pain as the metal bars closed around him. He pushed and twisted, tiny muscles straining, but the cage held firm, its cruel design still deadly even after years of rust. The lioness's head shot up at once. Her ears flicked forward, her body tensed, and in a flash she bolted toward the sound. The cub's cries tore through her chest like claws, driving her faster, faster. Grass bent and snapped beneath her weight as she leapt across the plain, her muscles burning with urgency. She arrived at the jungle's edge in seconds, her golden body vanishing into the shadows. Her eyes locked onto the cage, and the sight sent a low, furious growl rumbling from her throat. The cub reached for her through the bars, his small paw trembling. His mother circled, roaring in frustration, pawing at the iron that refused to bend beneath her strength. She bit the bars, pulled at them with her teeth, but the cage was built to endure. Blood pricked her gums, but still she fought, rage and desperation twisting every movement. The cub cried louder, and the lioness's roars shook the air like thunder, carrying far beyond the trees. From above, the forest canopy stirred. A silverback gorilla lifted his head, his dark eyes narrowing as the sound reached him. Around him, his troop shifted uneasily, mothers clutching their infants, younger males glancing toward their leader for guidance. The gorilla's chest rose and fell, deep and measured, but his gaze was fixed in the direction of the cries. He knew that sound, the sound of a young life caught in the grip of danger. The forest seemed to lean closer, waiting. The lioness raged against the cage, her cries mingling with her cubs in a symphony of pain and helplessness. Dust rose beneath her paws, her breath coming in quick, ragged bursts. She was a mother fighting the invisible, an enemy made of steel and silence. Above her, the gorilla shifted his massive body, stepping forward into the light. His troop murmured, uncertain, but his eyes remained locked on the scene below. The morning that had begun in peace was gone. In its place hung a silence filled with tension, the kind that clung to the air before a storm. The cub whimpered, his wide eyes clouded with fear, his small body pressed against the cold iron that held him captive. His mother roared again, her voice raw, echoing through the savannah as a plea to the wild itself. And from the trees, the gorilla listened. The world seemed to pause in that moment. The sun climbed higher, the grasses swayed, and every living thing felt the weight of the cries that pierced the forest. Something unnatural had disrupted the balance, something left behind by man's greed. And in the heart of the jungle, another guardian stirred, one whose choice would soon shape the fate of the cub. The golden light still touched the land, but its warmth no longer felt safe. The savannah, the forest, and the creatures within them stood at the edge of a cruel test. Innocence had been trapped, and the wild was listening. The story had only just begun. The savannah was no longer calm. It was alive with panic, the air shaking with the desperate roars of a mother who could not reach her child. Inside the rusted cage, the lion cub slammed his small body against the bars, his claws scraping uselessly over the metal. His cries were sharp, rising in pitch with every failed attempt to escape. Dust clung to his golden fur, and his chest heaved as he fought for freedom he could not win. Around him, the world blurred into a haze of sound. His mother's furious growls, the thrum of beating wings as birds fled, and the trembling silence of animals that dared not come closer. The lioness circled the cage like a storm, her amber eyes blazing with rage and terror. She lashed out with her paws, her claws screeching against the iron. Sparks of blood touched her mouth as she bit the bars, tugging until her jaw ached. Each second, her cub cried louder, his voice tearing through the wilderness like a knife. She roared again, her body trembling with the weight of helplessness, her breath coming in ragged bursts. But the cage, old as it was, did not break. From the edge of the forest, a shadow moved. The silverback gorilla stepped into the light, his enormous frame outlined against the trees. His dark fur caught the sun, his muscles rippling with each slow step. His presence was both steady and terrifying, like thunder rolling across the sky. Behind him, hidden in the safety of the canopy, his troop lingered. Mothers clutched their infants close, their eyes following their leader with quiet unease. The younger males shifted, uncertain, but none dared follow him. This was not their fight, it was his. The lioness froze, her ears flattened, her lips curled, and her roar changed from desperation to warning. She stood protectively between the gorilla and the cage, her tail lashing violently in the dust. Her instincts screamed that this was danger, another predator, another force that might threaten her cub. Yet her eyes flicked to the cage, to the small pole reaching through the bars, trembling. Hope flickered and died and flickered again in her gaze, leaving her caught between fury and despair. The gorilla did not charge. He did not bare his teeth. Instead, he lowered his head, watching the cub with deep, searching eyes. The cries of the little lion pierced him, carrying the weight of something universal, the sound of the helpless calling for mercy. His chest rose, powerful and slow, and then he moved. The lioness snarled, claws digging into the ground. For a moment it seemed she would attack, her body coiled like a spring. But the gorilla's path did not veer toward her. It went to the cage. He reached it with deliberate slowness, his massive hands brushing the rusted metal. The cub whimpered, pressing himself back against the bars, eyes wide with fear. The lioness growled, her voice trembling with the confusion of not knowing whether to trust or strike. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with sudden force, the silverback gripped the cage. His fingers, thick and blackened with years of climbing and battling, wrapped around the iron. Muscles surged beneath his skin, his shoulders bulging as he pulled. The cage groaned in protest, its old hinges shrieking as though woken from a long sleep. Dust rained from its frame. The cub let out a terrified cry, but the gorilla only pulled harder, his breath rumbling deep in his chest. The sound was unbearable, the roar of the lioness, the whimper of the cub, the tearing shriek of rusted metal forced against itself. Every animal within earshot froze. Gazelles paused mid-step. Birds went silent in the branches. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. The savanna waited. The lioness's growls softened, almost against her will. Her muscles quivered, torn between the urge to pounce and the desperate prayer that this strange, powerful being might do what she could not. She stepped closer, slowly, her breath hot and uneven, her eyes darting between the gorilla's hands and her child's trembling form. The silverback roared, not in anger but in exertion, a thunderous sound that shook the air. The bars bent beneath his strength. One hinge snapped free, clanging against the ground. The cub flinched, pressing his tiny face against the gap, his whiskers brushing freedom. The lioness roared too, this time not in fury but in raw desperation, as if urging the gorilla to continue. It was a sound that cut to the bone, a mother's plea spoken in the only language she knew. The gorilla heaved again. His muscles trembled, his teeth clenched, and with a sudden crack, another bar gave way. The cub stumbled forward, his paw slipping through the widening space. The lioness crouched low, her eyes wild, ready to snatch him the moment the cage yielded. The cub whimpered one last time, then squeezed through. He tumbled onto the dirt, his body weak, his fur streaked with rust and dust. For a heartbeat, the world was still. The lioness lunged, sweeping her cub into her paws, pressing her muzzle against his tiny body. She licked him frantically, as if to erase every mark of the cage, every trace of fear. The gorilla stepped back, his chest heaved, his breath heavy from the effort. He looked at the mother and child, his dark eyes calm, unreadable. Around them, the forest remained silent, as if in awe of what had just taken place. The lioness turned her head. Her eyes met the gorilla's. For a moment, predator and primate locked in a gaze that defied nature itself. There was no roar, no growl, no threat, only silence, a quiet acknowledgement that something unexplainable had passed between them. The cub pressed himself closer to his mother, his body trembling, but alive. She curled around him protectively, her sides rising and falling with relief. Her ears twitched, but she did not move to attack. The gorilla, too, did not advance. He simply stood, a towering figure against the jungle's edge, and then, without a sound, he turned back toward the trees. His troops stirred as he approached, their eyes wide, their voices soft with low murmurs. Mothers pulled their infants closer, and the younger males shifted nervously, but none questioned him. The silverback disappeared into the green shadows, his back broad, his movements steady, as if nothing had happened at all. Behind him, the lioness rested her head over her cub, her tongue brushing gently over his fur. His breathing slowed, his cries fading into soft, tired whimpers. The cage lay broken, its twisted bars half buried in the dust, a scar of human cruelty left behind. But it no longer held power. The savanna exhaled. Birds called again, the grasses swayed, and life began to move forward. Yet something lingered in the silence, the memory of a moment when two worlds had collided, not with blood, but with strength and mercy. The cub nestled against his mother's chest, safe again. Above them, the sun burned brighter, chasing shadows back into the trees. And for one fragile, fleeting instant, the wild had shown that even in its rawest chaos, compassion could break through the bars. The final roar of metal breaking still echoed through the clearing when the cage door collapsed onto the dirt. The sound was sharp and raw, like a wound being torn open, and then silence followed, heavy and waiting. Out of the twisted gap, the lion cub stumbled forward. His legs shook beneath him, his small frame trembling as though even the air pressing against him was too much to bear. Dust clung to his golden fur, streaked with lines of rust where the bars had scraped his skin. He let out a weak cry and fell against the ground, collapsing just short of his mother's paws. The lioness rushed forward, her massive body dropping low as she pressed her muzzle against her cub. Her tongue swept across his fur, urgent but gentle, as if licking away not just the dirt but the terror itself. Her growls, sharp and panicked only moments ago, softened into deep, rumbling notes of relief. She nudged him with her nose, urging him to rise, to breathe, to remember who he was. The cub stirred weakly, his small tail twitching, and pressed his head into the warmth of her chest. Across from them, the gorilla stood still. His chest rose and fell with heavy, deliberate breaths, each one shaking the broad span of his shoulders. His fur was darkened with sweat, patches of it streaked where rust and sharp edges had grazed his skin. Yet his face held no anger, no triumph. His deep-set eyes watched the reunion before him, steady and calm, carrying a quiet understanding. For a long, unbroken moment, predator and primate faced one another, both tethered by the fragile life of a child. The lioness lifted her gaze from her cub, her amber eyes locked with the gorilla's, fierce and unblinking. Her body trembled with instinct. Every nerve reminded her that this was not an ally but another powerful beast who could harm her child. Yet something deeper stirred within her. She saw his stillness, his restraint, his decision to act not for himself but for the life of another. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she lowered her head. It was not submission, not fear, but acknowledgement. A silent gesture that crossed the invisible boundary of species. A mother's way of saying she understood. The gorilla did not move, did not answer with a sound. But his eyes, dark and scarred with the wisdom of survival, softened. He had not returned to his troop, though they stirred anxiously in the treeline, waiting for him to leave the danger behind. He stayed, watching the lioness gather her cub beneath her, the way she shielded his body with hers, the way her tail brushed over his back as if to mark him safe. He knew this moment was not his to claim. It belonged to them. The cub rose unsteadily, his small paws sinking into the dirt. His legs wobbled, but his mother nudged him forward, guiding him toward the tall grass at the savanna's edge. Each step carried him farther from the cage, farther from the memory of metal and fear. His ears flicked nervously, and his wide eyes darted once more toward the towering figure of the gorilla. But there was no threat in that gaze, only a calm watchfulness. The cub pressed closer to his mother's side, her strength shielding him as they disappeared into the grass. When the lioness finally turned away, her shoulders relaxed, her tail swayed with the rhythm of her stride, and her cub stayed close, tucked safely beneath her shadow. The rusted cage, broken and defeated, sat abandoned in the clearing, a reminder of cruelty that did not belong to the wild. The gorilla remained, his chest heaved, each breath carrying the weight of effort and something unspoken. His scarred face tilted toward the savanna, his gaze lingering on the space where mother and cub had vanished. In his eyes, there was a reflection, not of victory, but of recognition. The bond between parent and child was something he knew in his bones, something that shaped his every decision, every battle. Today, it had guided him to break the boundary between predator and prey, to act not out of instinct but out of compassion. The air shifted around him. Herd animals that had scattered in fear now began to return, their cautious steps pressing softly into the dirt. Gazelles lifted their heads, nostrils flaring, ears twitching, as they sniffed the air heavy with dust and rust. Birds rose into the sky once more, their wings flashing white against the endless blue. The savanna exhaled, life resuming its rhythm as if the world itself had waited for this moment to settle. Still, something had changed. The clearing felt different, touched by an invisible weight, as though the land itself had witnessed the choice that had been made and would remember it long after the dust had settled. The The broken cage lay half-buried, its bars twisted and silent, but its shadow seemed smaller now, defeated not just by strength but by mercy. The gorilla turned at last, his shoulders broad against the light. He moved back toward the trees, each step slow and deliberate, his breath steadying. His troop stirred with relief, mothers reaching for their young, the younger males shifting aside to let him pass. But none of them asked, none of them challenged. They had heard the cries, they had seen the broken cage, and they understood in their own way that something rare had occurred. From the canopy above, leaves rustled gently as the wind carried whispers across the clearing. The jungle did not speak in words, but its truth was clear. Sometimes survival is not only about strength. Sometimes it is about the choice to protect what is not your own. The gorilla paused at the edge of the trees, turning his head once more toward the grass where the lioness had gone. His dark eyes lingered, not searching, not expecting, only remembering. Then he slipped into the shadows of the forest, his massive form swallowed by green. The clearing remained, quiet now, the broken cage sinking deeper into the dust. A lesson had been carved into this place, etched not by humans but by the wild itself. Compassion had risen where it should not have, between predator and primate, bound by the simple truth of a child's cry. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the savanna. Birds wheeled in the distance, their calls echoing over the golden grass. And there, in the stillness left behind, the land held onto its story, proof that even in the harshest wilderness, mercy could bloom like a hidden flower, fragile yet eternal.